No one tells you how quietly the final year of life can arrive. It does not often come with sudden alarms or dramatic changes, but instead with soft shifts that most of us brush aside. An elderly loved one may eat less than before, sleep longer, or fall silent in conversations they once enjoyed. At first, these changes seem like ordinary aging, but in truth, they may be gentle signs that the body is preparing for rest. Many people imagine death as something sudden, like a light being switched off. Yet for so many, it is more like a dimming at dusk, a gradual slowing that whispers rather than shouts. The trouble is that these whispers are easy to miss, and by the time we recognize them, it is often too late to say what we need to say, to ask what we long to ask, or to create moments of peace rather than panic. This message is not meant to bring fear. It is meant to bring clarity and compassion, so that you can notice what is happening sooner and respond with love instead of worry. In this video, we will walk gently through 5 subtle but powerful signs that may appear in the final year of an elderly person's life. Each one is not a diagnosis, but a guide. And if you stay with me until the end, the 5th sign, the quietest of all, may help you see everything more clearly. Now, let us begin with the first sign. Sign number 1. Significant weight loss. When food no longer nourishes. One of the earliest and most telling signs that an elderly person may be entering their final year of life is a gradual, unintentional loss of weight. At first, this change is so subtle that many families overlook it. A belt that no longer needs tightening, a wedding ring that slips easily off the finger, or a favorite cardigan that suddenly hangs too loosely on the shoulders. These are often dismissed as normal parts of aging. Yet behind these quiet changes, the body is often speaking in its own language, preparing for a slower, gentler rhythm. Inside, many shifts are happening all at once. The digestive system, which once worked quickly and efficiently, begins to slow down. Meals that were once broken down with ease now linger in the stomach, and nutrients are not absorbed as well as before. Hormones that regulate hunger and fullness no longer send strong signals, leaving a loved one with little interest in a food or a sense of being full after only a few bites. Even when they try to eat, their body may not be able to use the meal as effectively as it once did. Muscle mass also begins to decline more rapidly, a process known as sarcopenia. Muscles that once allowed someone to move with strength and balance now weaken more quickly, and without enough protein or energy to rebuild, the body slowly loses both strength and size. This is why a loved one who still eats modestly may still grow thinner with each passing month. At the same time, changes in circulation and brain function can affect the senses of taste and smell, making food less enjoyable and further reducing appetite. For families, these changes can feel alarming, and the natural instinct is to act. A son or daughter may prepare favorite dishes, bring desserts, or buy protein supplements, hoping that by eating more, their loved one will regain strength. But often, weight loss at this stage is not something that can be fully reversed. It is not simply a matter of eating more. It is the body quietly shifting its priorities, conserving energy, and beginning the natural process of letting go. This does not mean that food no longer matters. On the contrary, food continues to play a deeply important role, though its purpose changes. Instead of focusing on calories and nutrition alone, the emphasis becomes comfort, dignity, and enjoyment. A warm bowl of soup, a spoonful of pudding, or a small serving of fruit may bring more pleasure than a large plate of food that feels overwhelming. Smoothies or broths can be easier to swallow than heavy meals. Sometimes a simple ritual, like sharing tea together in the afternoon, becomes more nourishing to the spirit than the body. I once knew a man named Harold who had always loved hearty meals. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and pecan pie were his favorites, and family dinners were the highlight of his week. But in his final year, all he wanted was tea and toast. His son tried everything: protein shakes, barbecued ribs, even his mother's old casserole recipes, but Harold gently explained one day, "I just like hearing the kettle boil. That's enough for me now." From then on, They made a ritual of sitting together each afternoon with a pot of tea. There were no heavy plates, no pressure to eat more, just the comfort of presence and the warmth of a simple habit they could share. That story holds an important lesson. In the final year, weight loss is not simply about the number on a scale. It is about the body signaling that it is preparing for rest rather than for survival. The most loving response is not to push, but to adapt. Ask your loved one how they feel instead of how much they have eaten. Offer small, comforting portions rather than large meals that may feel like a burden. Sit with them, not over them, and let the act of sharing food become less about management and more about connection, because in the end, what matters most is not the calories consumed, but the sense of dignity preserved, the comfort offered, and the love that fills the room. Sign number 2, persistent fatigue and weakness, when everyday tasks become mountains. Another quiet but powerful sign that a loved one may be approaching their final year is a deep and persistent fatigue, a kind of weariness that does not fade with sleep or rest. This is not the usual tiredness that follows a busy day or a restless night. It is something much heavier, a sense of exhaustion that begins in the morning and lingers throughout the day, shaping even the simplest routines into daunting challenges. Rising from bed feels more difficult. Walking across the room requires unexpected effort, and conversations that once flowed easily can leave a person feeling drained and distant inside the body. This fatigue reflects a slowing of the systems that once provided energy and strength. The heart may no longer pump as efficiently, sending less oxygen to the muscles and the brain. The lungs, too, may struggle to expand fully, leaving breaths shallow and limited. Even the body's ability to process food into usable energy becomes less effective, meaning that meals no longer provide the same strength they once did. As a result, the cycle becomes clear. With less energy, movement decreases, and with less movement, muscles weaken further, creating a loop of exhaustion and stillness that grows harder to break. For families and caregivers, this change can be difficult to accept. It may look as though a loved one is giving up, withdrawing from life, or losing their will to engage. In truth, it is rarely a matter of choice. The body itself is setting new limits, quietly asking for gentleness and patience. The most compassionate response is not to urge more activity, but to honor the slower pace. Stillness in these moments can be deeply meaningful. A soft chair by the window, the afternoon light warming the room, a quiet cup of tea held carefully in both hands. These small details offer peace that no amount of encouragement to keep going can replace. The focus should shift from what a loved one can no longer do to what still brings comfort and calm. This does not mean abandoning activity altogether. Gentle movement, such as short walks across the room or slow stretches, can still be helpful if they are welcomed. But the emphasis should remain on ease, not achievement. It is not about pushing them to return to what they once managed, but about meeting them where they are now. In a body that has chosen stillness more often than motion, families sometimes struggle with the silence that fatigue brings. A spouse may miss the conversations that once filled the evenings, or a child may wish to see the parent active and strong again. Yet in these moments, presence is more important than performance. Sitting together in quiet companionship, offering a calm voice or a gentle touch, can provide more comfort than words of encouragement to stand or walk. When everyday tasks begin to feel like mountains, the greatest gift you can offer is not a push to climb, but a steady hand that says, "It is all right to rest. I am here with you." This reassurance transforms fatigue from a source of frustration into an opportunity for connection. It reminds your loved one that their worth is not measured by how much they can do, but by who they are and how deeply they are loved. Persistent fatigue and weakness are not signs of defeat. They are the body's way of moving towards stillness, a slower rhythm that deserves as much respect as the strength that came before it. When you learn to honor that rhythm, you give your loved one the peace they long for, and you remind them that even in stillness, they are never alone. Sign number 3, cognitive decline and emotional withdrawal, when the mind grows quieter. Sometimes, the most noticeable changes in a loved one are not physical but mental, and they often appear in the form of silence. A person who once filled the room with stories, laughter, and questions may begin to sit quietly, watching more than speaking. They might nod politely at conversations without truly following them, or smile in response to jokes that they may not fully understand. At first, these changes seem subtle, almost unimportant, but over time, it becomes clear that the mind is slowly growing quieter, retreating into a more private space. Cognitive decline in the final year does not always begin with forgetting names or losing track of where the keys are. More often, it shows up as withdrawal. A loved one might avoid eye contact, speak less often, or stop asking questions about what is happening around them. They may find it harder to follow a fast-paced conversation, to remember recent events, or to respond to sudden changes in topic for those who love them. This withdrawal can feel personal, even painful, as though the bond is fading. But what is really happening is that the brain, much like the body, is slowing its pace, conserving what little energy remains. Inside the brain, circulation declines, and with it, the steady flow of oxygen and nutrients that once supported sharp memory and quick thinking. The pathways that connect memory, language, and emotion begin to tire. Signals travel more slowly or not at all. This makes it difficult to process information, find the right words, or stay engaged in long conversations. For many elderly people, the effort becomes overwhelming, and so they choose silence over struggle. The emotional impact of this stage is profound. Families often feel as though they are losing their loved one before death actually arrives. A daughter may feel hurt when her mother no longer asks about her day. A husband may ache when his wife no longer responds to his stories with the same warmth. Yet it is important to remember that this withdrawal is not rejection, and it is not a lack of love. It is simply a sign that the brain no longer has the same strength to carry the weight of connection in the way it once did. In these moments, the most meaningful response is patience and presence. There is no need to correct every forgotten detail or to remind them constantly of names and places. Instead, focus on creating calm companionship. Hold their hand even if they do not squeeze back. Speak softly, even if they do not answer. Sit beside them without expecting conversation, knowing that the warmth of your presence may bring more comfort than words ever could. I once met a woman named Clara, whose husband, James, had always been the storyteller of their family. In his final year, he stopped speaking much at all. Clara confessed that at first. She tried to fill the silence with her own words, telling him long stories in hopes of sparking his memory. But one day, as she held his hand and simply sat in the quiet, she realized he seemed more at peace than at any other time. "He may not speak to me," she said, "but I know he still feels me here." That is the truth of this sign. Even as words fade, feelings remain. Love is not only carried in conversation, but also in the tone of a voice, the warmth of a hand, and the quiet comfort of simply being present. Cognitive decline and emotional withdrawal are not the end of connection. They are an invitation to connect differently, more gently, more patiently, more silently. So when the mind grows quieter, do not measure your bond by how many words are spoken. Instead, let love be felt in the stillness, for even when memory slips away, the heart often remembers what matters most: the comfort of being cared for and the assurance that they are not alone. Sign number 4. Frequent infections and slow healing, when the body grows quiet in its defenses. Another sign that an elderly person may be entering their final year is a noticeable change in the way their body responds to illness and injury. Colds seem to linger longer than before. A bruise fades slowly, or a small cut remains open for weeks. Infections, Whether a simple urinary tract infection, a cough, or a skin irritation return more frequently. These issues may look minor on the surface, but together they reveal something deeper. The body's defenses are growing quieter, no longer fighting back with the strength they once had. The immune system, which has protected us throughout life, naturally becomes less efficient with age. White blood cells respond more slowly to threats. Tissues repair themselves less quickly, and inflammation does not resolve as cleanly as it once did. In the final year, these natural changes become more pronounced. What was once a brief inconvenience, a sore throat, a scrape, a mild fever can turn into weeks of weakness or confusion. Even more troubling, infections in older adults often do not appear with obvious warning signs. Instead of spiking a fever, the body may simply show more fatigue, disinterest in eating, or sudden confusion. For families, these changes can be easy to miss, especially if they expect illness to look the way it did when their loved one was younger. The instinct, of course, is to respond with urgency. Families may rush to the hospital, pursue stronger medicines, or insist on new treatments, and in some cases, these steps are necessary. But there is another truth that is harder to face. The body at this stage is no longer focused on fighting. It is turning inward, saving what strength remains for comfort rather than for battle. This is where the role of care begins to shift. Instead of focusing only on curing, the focus gently moves toward comforting. That comfort can take many forms. It may mean making sure your loved one stays hydrated, since even mild dehydration can make infections worse. It may mean keeping the skin clean and moisturized to protect against sores and irritations. It may mean offering warm blankets, fresh sheets, and soft clothing that help them feel cared for in small but meaningful ways. These details may sound simple, but at this stage, they can carry as much healing power as medicine. I once knew an elderly woman named Margaret who suffered from repeated urinary infections in her final year. At first, her family rushed her to the hospital each time, desperate for answers and cures. But after months of repeated treatments and exhausting hospital stays, they realized what Margaret wanted most was to remain at home, in her own bed, surrounded by the people she loved. They learned to focus less on eradicating every infection and more on keeping her comfortable, hydrated, and calm. What mattered most was not extending the fight, but preserving her peace. It can be difficult for families to accept this shift, because it feels natural to want to protect a loved one with every tool available. But frequent infections and slow healing are often not battles to be won. They are messages from the body that it is choosing rest over resistance. By noticing these signs and responding with gentle care, you can give your loved one the reassurance that they are not alone, that they are safe, and that they no longer need to be strong in order to be loved. In the end, healing at this stage does not always mean returning to health. Sometimes, healing means creating wholeness in the present moment through comfort, calm, and presence. Even as the body's defenses grow quiet, love can remain strong, offering the peace that medicine cannot provide. Sign number 5. Changes in breathing and circulation. When the rhythm slows. Perhaps the clearest sign that an elderly person is entering their final year is found in the rhythm of their breath and the quiet shifts in their circulation. These changes can be unsettling to witness, but they are not signs of pain or struggle. They are the body's natural way of slowing down. Step by gentle step, breathing often changes first. A loved one who once breathed evenly and steadily may now breathe more slowly, with longer pauses between each breath. Sometimes, the rhythm becomes uneven. Deep breaths may be followed by stillness, then a sudden return to breathing again. This pattern, known as Cheney-Stokes breathing, can sound unusual to those who have never experienced it, but it is not harmful or frightening to the person themselves. It is simply the body's way of easing into rest. One breath at a time, circulation begins to shift as well. Hands and feet often grow cooler to the touch. Even in a warm room, the skin may take on a bluish or mottled tone, especially around the fingers, toes, and lips. These changes occur because the body is conserving in its energy, sending blood to the heart and brain rather than to the outer edges. Even movement, as simple as sitting up or turning in bed, may cause shortness of breath, leaving the person with little strength for conversation or activity. In time, they may spend more hours resting with their eyes closed, quiet and still, while the body gradually turns inward. For family members, these changes can stir anxiety. It is natural to want to intervene, to encourage deeper breaths, or to worry when hands feel cold and breathing pauses. Yet what is happening is not a crisis to fix, but a rhythm to honor. The body is not breaking, it is finding its way toward peace. In these moments, comfort matters far more than intervention. A room kept calm and softly lit, a window slightly open to bring in fresh air, or a humidifier to ease dry breathing can all make a difference. Offering a sip of water, if they are still able to swallow, can bring relief. Oxygen or light medication may sometimes be useful, but often, the most powerful comfort comes from presence, sitting quietly at the bedside, speaking with a steady voice, and holding their hand can provide a sense of safety that no treatment can replace. I remember a man named George who, in his last months, developed a breathing pattern that frightened his family. His daughter told me she would sit up at night, counting the seconds between his breaths, afraid that one pause would be the last. Over time, though, she began to understand that the pauses were not signs of suffering, but signs of peace. It was like watching the tide go out, she said, slow, steady, and calm. What once filled her with fear became a rhythm she could sit with, allowing her to be present without panic. This is the lesson of the final sign. When breathing slows and circulation retreats, it is not the end of love, but an invitation to love more deeply. It is a call to slow down alongside them, to match their quiet pace with your own presence. These changes may look unfamiliar, but they are gentle markers of a body that has carried its owner faithfully and is now ready to rest. So if you notice cooler hands, bluish skin, or breathing that comes and goes, let it remind you not of fear, but of tenderness. This is the time to sit close, to whisper words of reassurance, and to remind your loved one through touch, voice, and presence that they are safe, they are cherished, and they are not alone. Final reflection: when presence is the greatest gift. As we come to the end of this journey, let us pause and reflect on the 5 signs we have shared together. The gradual weight loss that signals the body is conserving energy, the deep fatigue that makes even simple tasks feel heavy, the quiet withdrawal of the mind and emotions, the infections and wounds that linger longer than they once did, and finally, the slowing of breath and circulation that reveals the body's wisdom in turning inward. Each of these signs can be difficult to witness, but each carries a gentle message. They remind us that the body is preparing not for battle, but for peace. Recognizing these signs does not mean that hope has been lost. On the contrary, it means that love can be offered more clearly, with greater compassion and patience. It is an invitation to shift from trying to fix every problem towards simply being present in every moment. In the final chapter of life, what matters most is not how many days remain, but how those days are lived, whether they are filled with fear and urgency, or with calm, dignity, and love. You may not always know the perfect words to say. You may not be able to change the path that lies ahead, but your presence, your quiet, steady, loving presence can be the most powerful gift of all. Sometimes it is enough simply to sit beside them, to hold a hand, to whisper that they are not alone, because in the end, life is not measured by its length, but by the love that fills it. And when you offer your presence in these final moments, you give a gift that is greater than medicine. Greater than words, you give the gift of peace.